Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Limb, where we explore physical therapy evidence, expertise, and innovation in limb loss and limb difference care. I'm your host, Will Riddick, and I'm a physical therapist focused on improving care for people with limb loss and limb difference. Healthcare is and should be a team effort. And the limb loss population, physical therapists, and prosthetists are both key elements to the team. They each bring unique expertise, and when they work together effectively, patients get the benefit. Today, we're talking about what successful collaboration between physical therapists and certified prosthetist orthotists looks like, including how we can improve communication, better understand each other's roles, and ultimately provide better care for our patients. So, joining me today is Kiley Armstrong, research prosthetist orthotist at Northwestern University's Prosthetics Orthotics Center and co-chair of the American Academy of Orthotists and Prosthetist Gait Society. Kiley, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Will, thanks for having me. Excited to talk about a topic we're both passionate about too.
Yeah, and I'm so excited I actually got through those prosthetists and orthotists the amount of times that I did.
That's so true. As my grandma says, there's a lot of T's and H's in there.
That's right. So for our listeners, we may be shortening things to PTs, CPOs, CPs, etc. as we get going. Well, to kind of get us started, Kiley, give me a little bit of background about, how did you get into this field, basically?
Yeah, I found out about it in high school, which I feel like is a little unusual. People typically find out about O&P as a career path later on. But when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to go into the medical field, wasn't really sure what path exactly within medicine. So I had joined a professional club at my high school called Women in Medicine, and we would shadow different women in the medical field every month. And just so happened that an O&P facility was on the schedule, which again, it's just like fate sometimes when I tell this story, because I'm like, that is not the typical, like O&P is so niche. People usually find out about it through such strange ways. But as soon as I was there shadowing, got to see the combination of like the medical aspect, but also in the lab, like building things, very hands-on. I pretty much immediately knew that I wanted to go into O&P from that experience. My path after that was a little winding, as it always tends to be, but I knew that was ultimately what I wanted to get into.
Yeah. So would you say that it was the more of the hands-on experience, or was it like a certain population or like meeting a population that was kind of like a main driver?
I do think it was the hands-on. I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering. So having that like hands-on innovative like aspect was really appealing to me. But while I was at the clinic shadowing, I got to meet a bilateral prosthetic limb user. And that was really fascinating. Like she just kind of gave her whole story. That was my first time like that I can remember meeting somebody with amputations. So kind of hearing her story and hearing how receiving her prostheses and receiving that care had been impactful, kind of really was like a nice bow on the end of the day to like, yeah, this is what I want to do.
I'm curious, have you kind of tried to offer that same thing to kind of the next generation of potential prosthetist orthotist, kind of getting them in and educating people and making awareness of the profession?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything like in an official capacity, but I am involved in quite a few initiatives within the academy, one of which is called the Collaborative on Inclusive Action and Engagement. A lot of words, but essentially we're trying to engage individuals of minority backgrounds or underrepresentation into the field. And one of our big pushes is to kind of get individuals aware of the field sooner. So that's been something that's been like a topic of conversation for sure.
Very neat. And I feel like physical therapy is a little bit of the same way. I think that's a little bit more visible in many ways. But I think you would be hard pressed to find somebody who has become a physical therapist or is in physical therapy school that hasn't had direct experience with one or having met one, and then that was the main driver of bringing them into the profession.
Yeah, totally. That's such a good point. Like actually physically meeting and getting to know more from an individual in that field is a really important step to recruitment. Yeah, I mean, coming like as an athlete, I know so many of my former teammates, had gone to physical therapy, so their path was physical therapy. It is really interesting.
Now your role as kind of into this kind of research realm, and even in your roles within like the Gate Society and more, kind of how did you build towards that, kind of exceeding past like your day-to-day practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was in undergrad, like I said, after I knew I wanted to go into O&P, my path got a little windy before it kind of leveled out. Studied biomedical engineering, and I did it with the goal of ultimately getting into O&P. But I was like, you know what? I'm getting this whole degree in engineering, and I don't really even know what an engineer does. Like, I should probably investigate that before I just make this decision to go on to grad school. So I did do a co-op at Philips Healthcare. I was on a team where we were like designing CT scanners. Ultimately, it just kind of reaffirmed that I wanted to go more of a clinical route rather than being engineering. But my graduation degree or my graduation date was delayed a semester since I took the semester off for the co-op. So after some discussions with my advisor, he recommended that I do the 4+1 program that my school had. So I ended up getting my master's in biomedical engineering to kind of fill some of that time, take some classes. And I was already involved in research in a research lab, doing research on functional electrical stimulation in individuals with spinal cord injury, combining that with different types of orthotic bracing, seeing what kind of functional activities we can get these individuals back to. And during that time, I was like, wow, I love research. I really found like an affinity towards that. And again, I was like, I want to do research in prosthetics and orthotics. But it also kind of reaffirmed my decision again that I need to go to grad school, get my MPO, get some clinical experience, because I was like, I don't even know what kind of research questions to ask about this clinical field. And so it kind of figured itself out. I ultimately got my MPO, did some clinical experience. And research has always been like kind of my interest point. So even while I've been working clinically, I've had some sort of touch point within research, which I found really interesting. I think it makes me think in new ways, kind of push against the norm, push against the grain of what is traditionally done, and see things from a new perspective, which I really enjoy. And when this position that I currently hold at Northwestern opened up, I was like, kind of a no-brainer. There's not too many research positions in the field of O&P for a prosthetist orthotist. So I was like, I should jump on this. This is where I went to graduate school for my MPO. So I was like, it kind of all felt like it was tied together. And I felt good about that decision.
I think also just even the way you describe, kind of thinking about things in different ways and kind of coming at it, flipping things on its head. I think that also will tie well into the rest of our conversation and how we can kind of assess the kind of collaborative role between professions even. So knowing a little bit of background, I know you have some background on that for sure. But let's kind of set the stage here a little bit. Most listeners here, physical therapists, are familiar with that kind of scene. I don't think kind of across the board, I would even say in the kind of the whole of medicine or healthcare in general, that many people understand kind of what the prosthetist role is, what the day-to-day looks like. Kind of give me sort of a walkthrough of what it's like being a prosthetist and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, our day-to-day can mimic very closely a physical therapist's. We're just, our end goal is a little bit different. We start with, and either receiving a prescription from a patient or a doctor, or patient calls us with a need for a new device or an evaluation. So we get that evaluation appointment, figuring out, what's their history, what kind of devices have they used in the past, what's been successful, what hasn't worked, what other types of treatments have they received that would impact their use of a device, figure out, do like manual muscle testing, range of motion, if they have the ability to walk, whether that's with an old prosthesis, with their current orthotic device, do some gait assessment, and kind of tie in that whole physical assessment to get a picture of where they're at, figure out their goals. What do they want? What, are they working? Are they, do they have assistants at home with these types of things? Do they have kids? Get a real sense of like what their day-to-day life is and how all of these pieces are tied together. And from there, we can create like a treatment plan. And for us, the treatment plan is a device prescription. So what kind of socket are we going to make? What kind of prosthetic foot are we going to select for them out of a whole array of many, many prosthetic feet? If they're above knee, what kind of prosthetic knee do they need? So that's kind of the treatment plan that we've created, and we have to take those next steps of getting an impression of their residual limb. Whether the traditional way is casting, but there's also a lot of scanning happening now. Either way is effective, and every prosthetist kind of has developed their own technique of a workflow, which I think is also kind of a cool thing of our field, that everyone can kind of practice so uniquely and come to a very different conclusion, but ultimately patient success is still viable for no matter what pathway. And after taking that cast, we're doing modifications on the mold, getting it all set up, test socket. So we're have like a temporary plastic version of their socket so that we can assess fit, assess comfort, make any changes, get all the components aligned. And then ultimately, once we get the okay from the patient and we feel happy with the fit and the alignment and the function, we go to that definitive prosthesis, which is that, typically like a black carbon braid socket. People can individualize, which is great. And then from there, following up as needed. So as like after an immediate follow-up or after an immediate delivery, following up a little bit more regularly, making sure that things are working well. But once they're in like a constant state and they're feeling good, maybe follow-up is every 6 months until they need something again. So that's kind of our typical flow. Built within that is, heading out, doing hospital calls, going to sniffs, doing all of our paperwork similar to PT, all of our notes, and working with doctors' offices to get their notes to kind of justify to insurance, all of these things. So those are all kind of like working in the background, but really our day-to-day is that, that evaluation to delivery timeline for each patient.
I hear so many words within and how you describe that are evaluative in nature, like different outcomes that you're assessing, different elements, gait analysis, range of motion, all of these tools that, a lot of just rehabilitation clinicians in general are extremely familiar with. And I think there's often the misconception that prosthetists are kind of lumped into like the just equipment providers, like, oh, they provide you with this. But in the way you describe it, I think you so eloquently describe it, that it is so much an evaluative process. And talking and even into like colleagues of mine who may not be familiar with the profession of prosthetics and orthotics, at least this is how I might think about this. Feel free to correct me on this, but in a similar way. So like as a physical therapist myself, I'm seeing a patient, I'm evaluating a patient, and my intervention is providing an exercise or providing maybe some kind of manual intervention or something along those lines. And in a way, you are doing these same analyses, and your intervention is the device and the modification and the optimization of an external device.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I feel like a lot of times physical therapists and prosthetists are often working towards the same goal with a patient, some level of mobility or some level of independence, but our intervention, like you said, is different. And so we can frequently, and I think it happens a lot, like work in very siloed pathways, where, you know, you're on your path of exercise to achieve this goal, and I'm on my path of device intervention, and we can proceed without ever crossing paths. And I wonder, we've had these conversations before, how to improve that collaboration, because I do think that there's a lot of, I always think that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So, the two minds working together is going to create something much greater than the two minds working separately.
Yeah, my brain always goes to analogies. So I'm just thinking of like two artists trying to work on the same picture and not talking to each other. Like that would just be crazy. Like somebody just starts drawing mountains and you're like, this is a beach scene. Like, just like having no overlap at all whatsoever. Yeah, I think, for sure this collaboration is like absolutely key. You're working on the same patient to the same goal of optimizing their mobility, functional independence, et cetera. I'm curious, in terms of your own experience or in that of colleagues of yours, where have you typically seen this sort of like interaction between PTs and prosthetists?
Yeah, I think there's a really great opportunity when there's a new patient that comes in, whether they're new to a prosthesis or they're new to either the prosthetist or the physical therapist. I feel like that is a really good touch point to, and it has been like, I've attended physical therapy appointments with them, and that way I can meet their physical therapist and get to know like their process. And I actually learned so much by hearing how, what are they observing when they're watching their gait or when they're doing various, functional tasks with them that I'm not trained to know, those specific details about, and how that informs my decisions. I think also, pretty like interwoven when you go into hospitals immediately post amputation. Physical therapists are usually around, and are frequently helping with that post amputation, like limb health and limb care. And so that's also has been a good touch point. And then I feel like beyond those like kind of naturally occurring arenas, like you have to be very deliberate about making those connections happen. And quite frankly, they can just, go to the wayside and never happen. So it does have to be something that is, you're consciously making the decision to do. And that is only going to happen once you feel like, making this extra effort is actually going to add benefit, because it is a little bit extra work. The communication piece and maybe the coordinating of schedules and a little extra work. So, you have to realize, hopefully, that there is a greater benefit by putting in that extra effort.
Yeah, and I could say from the PT side, I think it's, in my early career, I had the chance to spend countless hours in a prosthetic orthotics clinic, where I got to just, anytime I didn't have patients, I would just go hang out in the lab and just get to learn and experience from that. And that was invaluable. And even today, so like when I have a student, if I'm having them for a long time, I am shoving them
Yeah.
in a lab just to be like, you need to go and learn this and experience this and hear what they're saying, to have that good collaborative experience.
Yeah.
Even for students I have who aren't going in that exact field, but I think everybody has some touch point along the way for sure.
Yeah.
I want to kind of hear, I think one of the challenges, perhaps on your side of things, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, is so when you have a patient, let's say we have a patient who's just had an amputation,
Mhm.
they go through, and in terms of like the physical therapy side of things, they initially go to an acute care hospital post-surgically. And so they're working with a physical therapist there who has some contact with them. Maybe they go to an inpatient rehab, maybe they go to a skilled nursing facility, maybe they're being seen in home health, then they're going to outpatient. So you may have 5 or 6 different kind of, care partner, or
Yeah.
physical therapist that might be working with the patient. I'm curious, as you meet a patient kind of earlier on the process,
Mhm.
how does that communication along the pathway go?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as hands are kind of passing off, um, involving your patient in the communication. I mean, you don't want to use them as your form of communication, like, oh, go tell your PT this, but keeping them in the loop as a part of your team, I feel like has been really helpful. Sometimes also not, because there are times where they're like, oh, I don't even know who I saw today. So that can also be a challenge. But I think if there are like consistent hospitals that you're working with, or SNFs that you're working with, having at least one person at each of those places that you can rely on to like help figure out who is working with who's got passed off to whomever. I think that is a really beneficial thing to have too. And if you are comfortable with it, providing cell phone numbers so that you're not having to wait for the front desk to go get so and so to be able to communicate, or pass a note off because they're with a patient. I think that makes a direct line of communication better too.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having direct contact with
Yeah.
folks, because that just makes a world of a difference. And yeah, I think it's a really neat idea of having even like a key contact person per facility. I think in many ways I serve as that for my organization, so
Mm.
I could speak a little bit of experience from that one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I think one of the things that's really neat about uh, prosthetists in general is you have this continuous ongoing relationship, um, with your patients, which I think is really, really, really interesting. Um, and I would say that in physical therapy, we don't always have that continuity. Now, I like to argue for my patients. So I am an outpatient, and I think an outpatient, there's that potential to have an ongoing, lifelong partnership with your
Mhm.
patient.
Mhm.
Um, I'm kind of curious. We talked a little bit about how you are working with your patient through these different care phases of how you are developing the device that you're providing them, adjusting, and all that kind of stuff. How do you kind of like engage them across the lifetime, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you do have to definitely meet your patient where they are, especially immediately post amputation. They're getting bombarded with a lot of different information. So, keeping things simple but repetitive is really helpful. But I think also, kind of going back to a point I alluded to, but like really engaging your patient as a part of the care team and giving, I think it's really easy, probably as a PT, but I can't speak to that. But as a prosthetist, it's really easy for us to, we are the experts in all the prosthetic technology. So let me just pick the feet and the knees and the socket setup that I know is going to be best for you. But when I was practicing clinically, I always said, okay, these are our options. This is what I do recommend for you. And then I would go through the pros and cons of various things. If somebody was, really curious about which it doesn't happen that often. A lot of times people they want you to tell them and they want your expertise, but giving them that choice makes them feel engaged. But if somebody was really stuck between like, well, I don't know both of these options, I would say, okay, let's make one of, if it's a pin locking socket versus a suction socket, let's just make a test socket of each version so you can really feel the difference. And usually immediately you'll know which one you prefer. And also, I have to add the caveat that that's not possible at all places. We get paid at the end for the device we provide, not the amount of time we provide. So everyone has limited resources, or they're working within a limitation of the resources that they are available to them. But if people are able to provide at least that choice, but even the verbal explanation, that really engages the patient to making them feel like, okay, my prosthetist, first of all, is well versed in all of these different things, knows the pros and cons, can clearly articulate that, and wants my opinion of what I'm most interested in. So that's been that has been helpful in engaging people in the process. And then once people are like lifetime users, those like 5, 10 plus years, I mean, they're coming to you and they're telling you exactly what they need. This componentry is broken. I need that and I'm out of here. Those appointments actually tend to be pretty quick until you get to, sockets. But generally, once people have been kind of lifelong patients, like you were talking about, that trust has been built so naturally that those appointments really run very like fluidly and smoothly.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a point you mentioned, and I think this is important for kind of anybody to really realize that you're mentioning that payment for prosthetists comes at the delivery of the device.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime that you are visiting a clinic, anytime that I go into the hospital, for example, to meet patients there, anytime that you're on a phone call, even directly being with patients, you're not billing for that time. It is
Mm-hmm.
that. So yeah, in terms of resources, sometimes you have to be a little bit judicious in that, depending on your setting, of course.
Yeah. And I know, I feel like I've heard physical therapists also express confusion, like, oh, well, this prosthetist did XYZ and this prosthetist doesn't do quite as much. And, I mean, obviously there's variations in personality type, but also if they work for different companies, the company they work for may be like really limiting the amount that they can do if they aren't being paid for it. So just taking that into consideration, and if that is like a concern, communicate with your prosthetist, and they may be able to tell you why that's happening. And maybe they weren't aware that that was a concern, and they can dig a little deeper into insurance or whatever.
To kind of move on, in terms of kind of building these like partnerships and communication between PTs and prosthetists, we mentioned earlier, kind of like if you have the opportunity or engaging your patient,
Mm-hmm.
the patient can be a connector of
Mm-hmm.
sorts, utilizing cell phone numbers, potentially email addresses, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and direct clinic contacts. But are there any other ways that you have done or have seen that have kind of worked to improve that line of communication?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've had this conversation before talking about outcome measures, but I think that if we can have a discussion of a patient's outcome measures with physical therapists, that's huge. Kind of going back to, prosthetists aren't paid for our time. Sometimes, unfortunately, when we're seeing a patient, those outcome measures are kind of lowest on our priority, but that doesn't mean we don't need them, especially the AMP Pro. So, talking to the physical therapist and, asking if they've done that outcome measure, or asking if they can, and let you know what the results are. I feel like that could be a really natural point of connection too, where you're engaging each other in perhaps their expertise in a way that they feel comfortable, and relying on each other to kind of discuss, okay, what does what do the results of this outcome measure mean for this patient from my perspective versus your perspective? And I think that could just strengthen a relationship inherently.
Yeah, for myself, I have kind of a battery of tests and measures that I like to provide. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, though. If you were, let's say you're trying to get a patient a certain device, and you know it's going to be an uphill battle in terms of getting authorization of it, and you could get the dream note, the dream note from the physical therapist, what does it have in it?
Oh man, that is a great question. That's tough. I mean, I think documenting like that they are using and wearing their device, that is hugely helpful. Documenting, their level of independence with the device. Documenting issues that they are having with the device, because obviously if we are trying to get something new, then there must be something wrong with what they're using, or that should be the assumption. So documenting all of that, but like making it clear that they've progressed to a point that they can, and now a new device is needed, is really helpful. Yeah, and then go ahead.
Yeah, I think that can be sometimes a tough balance to strike too. I think in the way that I often think of, acknowledging benefits, but also, pointing to some limitations.
Right.
I often like to think of it as that when I'm writing something to help kind of in this process, I'm trying to build up the patient's abilities, so that what they are capable and what they have done with the device that they have, but then almost painting the picture of, but this device stops here. The patient beyond that, the device is now getting left behind, or it is limiting where we could be going.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, and you said AMPRO is a big one. Walking speed, would you say?
Walking speed is helpful. I think especially once we start doing like above knee, like hydraulic or microprocessor knees, that's super helpful. Knowing like what is their capability with traversing different terrains, super helpful. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious too. So obviously there's the third very key person in this process of getting like authorization, which is the physician.
Right.
And oftentimes PTs and prosthetists are not the only ones kind of in the quote unquote room, that your physician is obviously there too. And I think one of the most common ways that that's seen is in like O&P clinics, like O&P, like clinics with like a hospital setting or something like that. Have you had experience with those, and how do those go?
Yeah, I have had experience with those. I think those are great. Again, that's a really amazing touch point of interdisciplinary care. Right at one appointment, our patient isn't having to bounce all over the place. And I think when they function well, everyone kind of knows their role, knows their expertise, I guess, more so, and provides that expertise for each patient, and you leave feeling like confident with, okay, each interdisciplinary professional is going to work on what aspect of patient care, and I feel like the patient feels like they are being taken care of. I think that is a really efficient way, and you can get all the outcome measures you need right there, with the physician being able to document that. That's also a nice thing, is, being able to talk to the physician in that moment, like, okay, we are going to need you to write this in your notes, or, you mention these things, mention that they're K2, mention that they're K3 in your notes, so that corroborates what we're saying. So then you don't, you skip a lot of the back and forth communication between offices.
Yeah, and I think it goes without saying that is an ideal situation to have for a big, but a rare situation, I would also say too, because unless you're lit around like a major medical center, that's a pretty high bar to reach. So I think it goes back to the idea of that communication is incredibly key, building up those relationships with physicians, prosthetists, PTs, all across the board. So let's kind of go to this idea of, let's say a PT is working with a patient who's got a prosthetic. Let's say you're the prosthetist in this case. What would be some things that you would want them to, if something like X, Y, or Z happens, that they need to come back and see you? What would be those things, or example of those things?
Yeah. I think immediate examples are if they are consistently struggling with putting on a device for some reason. Is it weight fluctuation? Is it that, maybe the design just isn't great for them and we need to reevaluate? Definitely let us know if something's broken. That's helpful. Yeah. Letting us know if, major changes to their function. So whether they've regressed or progressed, let us know. If you've noticed changes in their balance, things like that. There may be different devices or components that we could put on to help with that. And then, there was the last one that I was thinking of that was like major.
Well, I can kind of point to this. I think one common challenge is, and this is really key in a lot of like early like prosthetic training education, is this idea of, is it a patient issue or is it a device issue?
Yes.
Do you have any resources or any kind of like, that's a like several weekend course unto itself. That's a lifetime of learning unto itself.
Yeah.
But is there kind of any like quick tips that you might have?
Yeah. Well, I think, I would definitely recommend PT clinics that are getting more, prosthetic users as patients. Like, get a prosthetist in there to do some CEUs, because they can do some really basic, like quick tips. I've done a few courses on, explaining what a prosthetist is looking at when we're doing alignment changes, not with the expectation of a PT to do alignment changes, but just to say, hey, if you're seeing that, then maybe it's not that their glute medius is so weak. It's actually that we need to do some alignment changes. But that's why I think involving, the counter discipline early is helpful, because we can get in a tailspin. And I've done it with alignment where I'm making this change and then I'm making this change and then and I just kind of keep going back and forth. And then the whole time it was, just some sort of musculature strength problem. And I'm sure the same thing with you guys, whether that's, contracture management. If we aren't aligning the device appropriately for their range of motion, then it's not going to work appropriately for them. And those are kinds of just like, it's not a quick tip, but just knowing that there are techniques that we have to really accommodate and account for all sorts of different deviations and weaknesses. And ideally, once we're working together, we can find that kind of perfect prescription or combination.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly extensive merit in, if you're running into a roadblock, reach out.
Yeah.
I think is a good way of looking at it. Certainly there's ideal of being able to catch things maybe a little bit before that.
Yes.
But I think I always worry, I mean, even for myself, that, you kind of hit a moment where, progress slows down. You might be hitting a plateau of things, and discharge planning is always the hardest thing. It's so hard in terms of a physical therapist, because you want your patient to run, even though they haven't run in 10 years. And, it's just, you want the shoots for the moon.
Yes.
But I think even so, I think it is important just to reach out and to have that collaborative conversation to see, are we missing something, or have we really truly addressed everything that we could possibly do for this patient and optimize their movement to what we can offer them.
Yeah. And I think, having a PT that's working with my patient reach out to me and ask me a question about their setup, their alignment, or, things that they're doing that don't seem to be working, like that would actually be very, that would build a lot of trust from my perspective. Because my expectation is not that a physical therapist is going to see a person using a prosthesis and know all of the answers. And in fact, I would maybe be more afraid of the PT that thinks that, you know what I mean? So asking me questions about their setup is actually going to make me feel a lot better. And in the worst situation, not the worst, there's obviously worse things that could happen, but it's also not great to hear from a patient like that they can feel that their PT is kind of chasing their tail. And so get feel out where you're at and contact the people before it becomes this bigger issue.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Patients can be very intuitive about those sort of things.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I think that just points to when we have that collaboration, it does offer, I think, a stronger continuum of care. Things are addressed a little bit quicker. Yeah. Just ultimately brings a better goal for the patient, or better end result.
Totally.
All right. So you are very much involved in the education atmosphere in terms, especially with the Academy of Orthotists and Prosthetists, as we mentioned before. Through that and maybe some other things, what opportunities are you aware of that there is to kind of educate both PTs and prosthetists together?
Yeah. So that seems like a very natural plug for Will and I's collaborative work that we've been pushing along. But the Gait Society with the Academy and the Amputation Care SIG with the APTA, we're working on pushing out more content that really focuses on those points of intersection and how to increase those points of intersection for collaboration between physical therapists and prosthetists. So for the Academy, we have webinars on the OLC, the Online Learning Center, and the APTA also is dropping some of those, the same content, but geared for our different audiences on the APTA's learning management system. So hoping to continue growing that piece of it. And I think that going to these, beyond this interdisciplinary collaboration, that piece that we're working on, going to each other's conferences would be incredibly insightful. I think especially for a physical therapist to attend the Academy, because the O&P is such a niche field that you can learn so much in just a day at the conference, whether that's, terminology, like it's a lot to pick up on. So I think those are great. And then I will plug that Northwestern also does a really great PT course for prosthetic management. Don't know off the top of my head when that is, but can look into it. They do it
on a regular basis.
Yes, it happens annually. So it's led by our faculty at Northwestern that are certified prosthetist orthotists. So it is a pretty well received course too.
Yeah. And I know there are a number of schools across the country that do offer kind of educational opportunities, especially from the prosthetics and orthotics schools, to kind of promote that collaboration. They really do a great job of that, from what I can see.
Yeah.
All right. Always my final question here. I was wondering if you could, this conversation of sort of this collaboration sort of things, can you share sort of a patient story that was kind of exemplary of this conversation?
Yeah. I think My best patient story that is exemplary of this conversation is when I was working in Denver. We had a PT who was, pretty new to like amputee care, prosthetic care, but she was really invested in wanting to learn more. And she was inviting me to all the appointments, and I was going regularly. And for that patient, we ended up getting them, like, I think not only like it was a few appointments, but they got through the rehab process relatively quickly because our interdisciplinary collaboration, we were, I was seeing them at the same time point and as the PT, and we were able to kind of work off the same data, and get them to a place where they were able to get back to work and do the things they wanted to do. And it was on a quicker timeline than we had anticipated for that patient. So and it was great that this PT showed so much self-initiative of, first of all, being open and honest with, yeah, I'm not that familiar with this group, this population, but I want to learn more, and opening up those channels of communication.
And I think that's a great example of how you don't necessarily have to be like the leading expert in the field, but being open to collaboration and bringing people into your team helps to strengthen the care that you can provide, even when you don't have, that maybe vast knowledge base that, you may think that you need to have.
Yeah.
So, nothing to say that education is not great. We should absolutely strive for that. Don't want to say that. But I think that's the huge value of that interprofessional collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. And prosthetists will jump on that opportunity because if there is a PT that is comfortable with and the expert with amputees, their schedule is full and booked, and everyone's referring to them. So it's like, okay, we would jump on the opportunity for more.
Excellent. Well, Kiley Armstrong, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Will.